welcome to the Political Paradigm Shift podcast. I'm your host, Nick, and today we are joined by Mr. Chuck, Mr. Art, and finally, Heather is back, and she's got her peace sign in the background and everything. Looks cool. So today we're going to address some stuff. We're going to briefly talk about the current status of the election. We're going to probably talk a little bit about court packing, which is a hot topic this week. And then we're going to, address probably some current events. How do you guys, as of right now, see the current trajectory of the election between Biden and Trump?
Like, who's going to win?
Who's going to win? Who do you guys think?
I still think there's no telling. I have absolutely no confidence in the polling.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to read this really.
I see your post. Like, I know you're optimistic and I know you're pessimistic. So I'm just going to.
All right. So I'm going to read this from this polling analyst that I discovered. His name is Nathaniel Silver. And he said Biden's win probability, now 86%, will continue to rise until unless we begin to see a tightening soon. My guess is that in an election held today, the model would have him with a 90 to 95% chance. It's a big lead that would be pretty robust to some serious polling errors. I think he meant to say there need to be some serious polling errors. So yeah, it's 84%, and it's tightening. It's actually every poll that comes in, it's trending worse for Trump. It's not as things normally get. And polls have a tendency, as the race gets tighter, to trend towards basically like a more of an even split.
Yeah.
Unless that's just not the case. And the information we're having coming in is actually painting a clearer and clearer picture that is not, closer to 50-50 split, but in fact, more of a break. So that happens too sometimes.
So that just so people know, because I think a lot of times people can't tell the difference between predictions and polls. So what Nate Silver's basing that off of is his model, which is based on a number of different factors. Primarily, I would say polling. And right now, I think the national average 538 has Biden up by 10 points. Mm-hmm. And I think RCP has him up by like 9. Although I could be wrong about that, which means that the majority of polling coming out right now for national polls, there's a huge split, like bigger than when Obama beat McCain. And I think Obama beat McCain by like 10, 12 million votes. And he destroyed him in the Electoral College, if I remember, which was like the biggest election win in like 20 years or something. Maybe more than that. So polling wise, nationally, it's looking pretty bad. And I think what Nate's talking about is what I heard him say on the podcast is the closer we get to election day, the higher the percentages that Biden wins, which is basically what you just said. So I guess, and I think I'm with Heather on this. I'm a little bit traumatized still from 2016. I just can't get out of this, watching everything go down and going in there. I guess some people were overconfident. I certainly wasn't overconfident. I was very skeptical. But just watching how everything kind of happened and everything collapsed, and I turned my TV off at like 8 p.m. and I just couldn't sleep. It was bad. I had a hard time for like 3 days.
Yeah.
And you only have to lose once at Russian roulette to be gun shy after that.
That's it.
That's right. And so I think that's part of it. If we go by the data, there is not one polling person who has any experience with polling in the entire world that's going to say Trump is in a good position. That's not to say he can't win rather. There are some avenues. If you look at Pennsylvania, the gap's still pretty high, but he could win there. Biden has a 4-point lead in the 538 average in Florida, which is just outside or at the margin of error. And Florida is a really iffy state. Arizona Trafalgar poll just came out in Arizona where Trump was 4 points ahead, just to, make this, the reason
Mildly
I cite,
surprising.
yeah,
Yeah.
the reason I cite that poll is because that poll was really accurate. It is a Republican leaning poll, and it is an
Okay.
an outside poll, but it was really accurate in 2016. So there is some reasons to be skeptical. There are definitely some pathways to victory, although they're really narrow, and so that's where we're at. What is your?
Well,
Yeah.
I wonder how accurate, again, the new dynamic or newer dynamic in the 2020 polls as opposed to 2016 is what I assume is going to be the increased prevalence of early voting. As these polls are coming out here in October, with 1 month to go, there are thousands and thousands of votes that are already in, and if there is any event or two that has a very dramatic shift between now and November 3rd, obviously it won't be reflected in those votes that have already been sent in. So as we get closer, with the larger amounts of early voting having taken place, these October surprises will have less and less and less impact because more and more votes will already be in. Now, again, right now, one thing I'm surprised is the post-debate and post-corona bump for Biden. I thought that might be a wash after the debate because I thought both of them, didn't do themselves any favors. But clearly, Biden has bounced up several points, no matter whose poll you look at, since the debate and the subsequent diagnosis for Trump. And you never say insurmountable lead because, like you said, anything can happen. But because so many people have got their votes in now, any poll changing event is going to have a lessened impact because you can't take those votes back. It's going to be weird to see how that plays.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I
Just
think
real
the
quick,
last,
it's 4 million that's in so far.
That's
Yeah.
right. Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
a lot.
I was going to say there was a recent poll that said that there's only like between 8 and 10% of people who are undecided this election. Most of us already know who we're voting for anyways.
They're
So-
going to decide probably the election.
I mean, probably, yeah, probably. But
You would have to think that the undecideds are the ones that are not by and large sending in the early vote. So yeah, there's still that possibility.
well, did you guys see the Pew poll? Did you see it, Art?
Which one?
Pew just did a poll of how many people were voting early or voting by mail versus how many people were voting in person. And it was like 65 to 35, Democrats versus Republicans, Democrats being 65, Republicans being 35, that are voting mail in or voting early, one of the two. And then that's flipped when it's voting in person. So like 65% of people, Republicans or Trump supporters, are voting in person.
yeah, I saw that. I did see that poll.
So the significance of that, to be honest, is in-person voting is much.
I have a hard
more
time
accurate.
believing that nationally 2/3 of every Democrat is voting early. I mean, that's a lot.
Not early, mail-in.
I mean,
I think
2/3
mail-in is the one I'm.
mail-in. Well, still, I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, this is why I'm a little skeptical of the polls being that off this time, is that, you have more people that identify as Democrat than Republican. And not to say voter suppression, because obviously that would never happen, but mysteriously in richer and whiter areas, it's easier to vote. The voting times are less, and there's more polling stations and all that than you see in perhaps more Democrat-leaning areas. So the interesting thing with the kind of mass, mailing is we'll actually be able to see when that's not a factor, what's the kind of discrepancy there. And there's also on the other side this idea that Trump voters are lying to pollsters, and they had this kind of a scheme cooked up to not tell
Yeah, I just
pollsters to
remember
throw things off. I'm sure you heard people talk about that. So it'll be interesting because you'll probably have some court cases or some issues, red flags thrown up to try and get rid of some of the mail-in voting, and that'll probably be successful in certain areas or in certain jurisdictions. But overall, it's probably going to be a large kind of a sea change in how we do things. So I think we'll
Yeah,
actually
moving
probably get a
forward,
pretty
it might.
accurate read. I'm sorry.
Moving forward, it absolutely might. This might be a really good answer to some of the polling location issues that we do see that suppress the vote. If you continue to offer early voting and mail-in voting, that could be a way for the Democratic Party to secure those votes moving forward. You're absolutely right.
There's been a lot of problems with mail-in voting though, hasn't there?
Well, if you look
Oh,
at
you mean like the
when you
ballots
say,
they found in the river?
which it didn't happen, which is funny, but like,
No, that, not that, not. I
yeah,
mean,
but when an interesting thing is you think about, our elections tend to have, some tens of millions of people who vote, and then, tens of millions of people who don't vote. So you have this huge amount of potential voters, let's call it 200 million, that could potentially be voting. So if you increase even by 50 million, the number of people who are eligible to vote and do vote, and then you lose 5 million votes for whatever reason, like you actually get a much better sample of the electorate, even if you had some absurd, crazy number, like 5 million is astounding. Like we've never had anything close to that. But if you add 50 million and lose 5, and you're like, well, that system's not very effective. It actually is way more effective as far as getting a sense of the electorate and what they want. It's just, you're taking a much smaller pool. Like we've got crazy low voting numbers compared to like Australia, where it's like 97%, which I think you have to pay a fine if you don't vote. So, but there's, at least in that case, you get to, you know what the electorate's thinking because they had to vote. So all I'm saying is that, there will be problems with mail-in voting, but I think that the aggregate result will be a huge amount of good votes that are in, and some number that is maybe higher than regular in-person voting, but still statistically pretty insignificant compared to the.
Right.
So
I agree. I
What I
agree,
was
but I
talking
still
about-
don't know if we can get people to go vote in droves just because it's being sent to their house.
So I actually don't think it's going to be as big of a problem just because people are so hyper vigilant and because it's such a high stakes election that everybody's going to be on top of it, especially in the places where it really matters, swing states.
Mhm.
But I think in New York, there was like tens of thousands of votes that were thrown out for one of their in-state elections, if I remember correctly,
Mhm.
that were mail-in votes or that were lost or they couldn't, something happened to them. So, I mean, just to throw it out there, in 2016 was decided by how many votes? Like 80,000 in 3 different states, across 3 different states. So if something
Well,
like
how about the
that-
2000 election?
Yeah.
Right. That's what
Couple
I
It was
mean.
Palm Beach, Florida, really decided that election.
500 or something.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, if it was a really close election and something like that happened, the disadvantage would likely be on Democrats because they tend to vote more in person. I mean, mail in, and Trump has encouraged all his supporters to vote in person, and it looks like a lot of them are listening to him.
Okay, but just to throw that out there, if you increase by 50 million, just as
I
some.
get what you're saying. I think
Okay,
it's
that's
a
all.
problem.
Is
Yeah.
it? Yeah. All right.
I don't necessarily think it's going to be a problem, but it is something to think about. So the moving on to the next topic, Chuck, I'm going to let you start out, and then we can kind of go around. So, court packing, probably the best thing that anybody could ever do, right?
Well, it's been a kind of a case study in the way politics are done. There's an old saying: if you control the language, you control the debate. And there's an effort underway to sort of appropriate language insofar as the phrase "pack the court." Obviously, the phrase "pack the court" is polling poorly with people. They have a very, very negative connotation of that phrase. And both sides are, as a result, trying to lay claim to that phrase, "pack the court." Now, for years, "pack the court" has had a very specific meaning to add 4 members, I believe, to the Supreme Court in the 1940s. Pack the court, literally in that sense, means to add extra seats to a court, which you then fill with your boys or girls. And that's the limit of the definition. That is packing the court. Now, the Democrats are clearly trying to get that definition expanded to include putting people on the court that you don't like, but not adding to the court. And that is a fundamentally different thing. I mean, that's filling vacancies. And there's never been a precedent that did not try to fill vacancies. And you can call what's happened the past 8 years, You can call it shitty, you can call it underhanded, you could call it dirtbag, you could call it filthy, you can call it whatever you want, but don't call it packing the court, because that has a very different meaning. I'm thinking that what's the effort behind this, number one, is to grab a hold and claim that phrase for yourself, because it's polling so poorly with people, you can use it as a weapon. February 2021, President Joe Biden leads an effort to add 2 seats to the Supreme Court. And people, Republicans, say, yeah, that's court packing. And then Biden says, well, you've been court packing for the last 8 years. And says it with a straight face. This is a case study in the power of language. And when you own a phrase, or believe you own a phrase, how it can be weaponized to your advantage. Again, what Trump has done in terms of appointing filling a large number of vacancies at the Supreme Court and the federal court level, call it Sunday, call it late for dinner, call it a bullshit move, whatever, but don't call it court packing, because that has a very specific meaning for a very different circumstance. But we're seeing it already. The Associated Press today updated their style guide to include letting reporters use court packing in more than just that instance. Now they can refer to Donald Trump filling a vacancy on the court as court packing when he's not adding seats. And it's infuriating to see an intentional attempt to change language in this way, because what gets lost is the truth. What gets lost is honesty. What gets lost is our ability to fairly disagree with each other when you utilize words in new and ways just for your pure advantage. Now, again, that's part of politics. You're trying to control as much as you can. But in this case right here, it's just, to me, it's just a simple prevarication. I don't think we should allow that, left or right, but it's going to happen, I fear.
So just really quick, I have an article from the National Review written by one Senator John Cornyn of Texas entitled "Don't Let Democrats Pack the DC Circuit Court" from October 30th of 2013, in which he complains about Obama.
He's wrong.
And well, no, I realize that. I'm just saying that this sort of thing has a bit of a pedigree.
Yeah.
And as far as the general concept, I mean, there is a difference between filling vacancies and adding seats. So I think that in a literal sense, we could say that yes, there is a difference. FDR famously considered packing the court in the 1930s, and it didn't come to pass, but it was it was a thing. And ultimately, I think it gets down to the value of forbearance and tradition and all that, and and hardball. And I think that the GOP, probably without cause, thought that the Democrat of abuse as far as games that were legal and constitutional, but maybe not traditional. What they did to Obama with Merrick Garland, et cetera, and then kind of inverting that once Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and then trying to slam someone through. And ultimately, if you're going to play the F you, it's constitutional, and I'm going to do what I want. If you're going to play that card, that kind of changes the scenario from what used to be, as far as more of a bipartisan approach to putting through judges, to just packing the court ideologically. And if that's the game, then that's the game. And I think that the Republicans probably have overplayed their hand here, but don't see any reasonable way of backing out of it. So we've just kind of started this arms race where, this is going to be what, I mean, court packing ultimately isn't about this idea that 9 is some magical number and that, we can't deviate from 9 because 9 is perfect. The balance we're talking about is ideological, and we've had a nice ideologically balanced court for quite a while. And that's been kind of the case, in the upper and lower courts. And I think the GOP's attempt to weaponize the courts is kind of taking the safeties off, and what we used to have as far as a again, a more bipartisan approach to filling the courts is now just something where it's just turned into a political battlefield on a field that the GOP has temporary advantage, and they're about to lose temporary advantage. And what goes forward would, for instance, if Biden adds 2 people to the Supreme Court and then drops the number down to 9, so the next 2 people to retire won't be replaced, for instance, the GOP to undo that would have to get the presidency and the Senate again. So you're looking at a set of conditions that might not occur, especially if they add DC and Puerto Rico. It could be a while before the GOP gets control of the Senate again. So they may have actually opened themselves up to this kind of revenge fest from the Democrats, so to speak, on the the court side that wouldn't have been available otherwise. Like you kind of have to do something to make somebody get away with that sort of thing, because court packing in the classic sense was unpopular. People were happy with 9. So that even 2 years ago, that wouldn't have been a thing. It wouldn't have been, no one would have considered it. But now it's the kind of thing where it's like the GOP is so intent on destabilizing the court. And by destabilize, I mean slant politically, one way, that, this is now what we're heading into is a kind of a safeties off, weapons free. People are going to just, make an exercise of power rather than one of forbearance.
I would say you mentioned Republicans weaponizing the court per se. When Democrats have the Senate, they have the White House, and they weaponize the court. If by weaponizing the court you mean appointing, nominating, and approving judges that are one and the same with their ideology. Yeah, call it weaponizing if you want to, but I mean that's just the fact that if you have a Democratic White House, Democratic Senate, they're going to appoint what they view as Democratic-friendly judges. Now, just again, luck of the draw, the Republicans have been in the White House more often than not when vacancies crop up on the Supreme Court, and as a result have been able to appoint their guys and girls inordinately to that. But we have, as a society, put more pressure or given more power to the Supreme Court than I think the founders intended. We have given them the ability to settle a lot of thorny legislative issues that should have been settled in these Supreme Court nominations into blood sport because it is important. We have put into the Supreme Court into the hands of 9 people some damned important decisions that should be made by Congress, should be made by 535 people as opposed to 9 people. But it's easier to get 9 people to agree with you than 535. So a lot of people have leaned on the court to do their legislating. And we're now seeing the very real impacts of it. Unfortunately, and it's not supposed to be like this.
No.
Go ahead, Heather.
I was just going to say, do you think that Merrick Garland or like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do you think that they were as far to the left as what people are saying maybe Kavanaugh or Barrett would be to the right? Do you think that
Kavanaugh's actually had a couple of rulings that bucked the conservative majority on the court in a couple of cases. A couple of cases has gone against Donald Trump's position on a particular issue. So yeah, he leans right, but he's not Clarence Thomas right. He's not Alito right. He's to the right. Ginsburg, for all of her, she was fairly far left, but she was not Sotomayor left. I mean, Sotomayor is really an advocate. No, I think so far, those who were worried that Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were going to be conservative rubber stamps, so far as they've bucked the president several times.
I just see that, like, that's obviously what the Democrats' big worry is with Barrett, especially the ACA, and
sure,
maybe some gay civil rights issues and possibly, women's abortion rights. I was listening to Schumer today, and he was previewing some things about this with Barrett, and he was talking about how, oh God, you guys can't think. He was talking about how she is a big threat to the ACA, and I know that we're in a really, I can't talk. Someone else needs to take over. I need to formulate my thoughts for a second. Give me a second.
So just to respond to what Chuck said initially, I agree with you on this. I think that the Democrats trying to spin this the definition of terms around is pretty disingenuous. It's disheartening for me to see the AP kind of put out this, allowing
That was the part. That was the part that pissed me off the most, where the AP is evidently falling right into
right, because
theft
it's like
this
they're being
quickly.
criticized
Yeah.
already for being, an arm of the Democratic Party, and then they
Sure.
do something to sort of help out the Democratic Party. Like, why do that? Why take that extra step to do that? And it
don't care.
delegitimizes the media even more. I mean, it's really, I don't know. It's pretty shitty, unethical, I would say. Certainly doesn't show that they're objective in this situation. And then, but I also agree with everything that Art said. I've written about this extensively in several posts on Facebook. So here's my thing, and this is from listening to lots and lots of conservative podcasts and all that stuff. My thoughts on this is that it seems like the perspective really from both sides is that, this has kind of been going on a while. The tit for tat has been going on since Bork in the 80s, when Reagan nominated him. And then, I think that Republicans have kind of internalized a lot of resentment towards Democrats. And if you go through the history, you can point out a lot of times where Democrats and Republicans violated some norm, whether it be getting rid of the filibuster for lower courts or filibuster for higher courts. But, I think in this particular circumstance, the way that I would justify it is that the Republicans have done it to such an extent this time. Like, not only did they eliminate the filibuster, like, okay, that seems like a proportional response to Reed's decision, but they also blocked Garland, essentially, made up a rationale, although McConnell was a little bit more, he elaborated on it a little bit better than anybody else, any of the other senators. And 4 years later, just completely went against the norm, the precedent that they set, right? And all of this comes down to them getting power, getting justices, their justices appointed in the court, and it just feels like a really sort of ruthless political move on their part. And I just feel like now here we are at such I mean people who lean left or consider themselves Democrat, and I don't really lean left these days, but I think that the balance on the court is important, and I think that there's now going to be a super majority of conservatives on the court, and I think that they did it through these really shitty strategic means, and so I just don't think that the Democrats adding seats to the court. So here's where the Republican argument is sort of, this is a dangerous move. It's a slippery slope argument, right? If you add 2 seats or however many seats to the Supreme Court, then the next time this person's in power, they're going to add more seats. And the next time this person's going to add more seats, and yada, yada, yada. I just don't know if I buy that argument. And I think a lot of it's for logistical reasons, like Art said, because first of all, there's a gazillion things that could happen over the next several years. I'm not really sure, based on lots of variables, that the Republicans are going to be in a position to sort of do something like that anytime soon. And I honestly think that some of the motivation behind being so shrewd in doing this was because they know that they're sort of a shrinking political party, right?
Yeah.
And so
that's their way to keep control.
It's a way to keep control. I mean, you're right. I mean, the court shouldn't have the power that they have. They have legislative power at this point, but they have it, and nobody's taking it back. And the advantage to the court making those decisions is they don't get elected. People don't vote on them, right? So it's easier for Congress to kind of just abdicate their responsibility to the court. So in any event, I see both sides of it. I do think it's risky. I do think that it violates norms. But what the fuck, man? Like, violate norms? Are you even kidding me? Like, I watched a president. The reason Donald Trump was elected was to violate norms. Every single time he does something corrupt or something unorthodox, I hear from every single one of his supporters, senators, congressmen, that he's doing it because that's why he was elected, to shake things up. That's the justification I've been hearing over the last 4 years. So now when I see these Republicans out telling me the sky's falling because we're going to violate norms, it really has no impact on me. I find it not persuasive at all. I see it as a desperate attempt to maintain the little power that they're going to have in the future. And it is unpopular, and it is what it is. And I think Biden's obviously equivocating on his responses. But that's nothing new. That everybody's like, I can't believe it. One guy on Twitter said it should be a disqualifier. Are you serious? A politician equivocating on an answer should be a disqualifier from running in politics, because nobody would ever run.
This is not the first time Biden has lied.
Right. Lots of people. Right.
Just saying, it's not the first.
And I don't even know if he's lying. I don't know what his position is on it. I don't think any of us do. I know that he's come out opposed to it in the past, but he just can't answer the question, because either way he's screwed.
I did find it curious that he said more or less to the local Las Vegas reporter that people didn't deserve to know. Now that's a new.
So this is where
frontier.
Biden isn't very good
Yeah.
at politics, because he's getting angry.
Yeah.
I think that's him getting frustrated, being like, they don't need to know. He's just that's what I saw.
Oh,
That
really? I don't.
When he was younger, he was better about dancing around that sort of thing. Not
Yeah.
perfect. I mean, he was still a gaffe machine, but like he was still better. Like, this is just a guy who's just old and is just tired of listening to you kids yap. Like, he's just tired of your yap. Like, you don't need to know. You don't need to know. I'll tell you when you need to know. You don't need to know. We'll get there when we get there, kids.
That
He's
is sort of what it
walking the
seems.
tightest of tightropes right now too, because he's trying to pander to the Republicans who are willing to let go of Trump, and he's also trying to pander to some of us progressives who are willing to, stay with the Democratic Party and see this through. So like, he's on the tightest of tightrope here, and he has to be this constant middle ground, and he can't say too much one way or too much the other way, or else
He could
there's this feeling that
probably
he's going to
answer
lose
it.
that.
He could probably give a better answer if he was a better politician, like Clinton or Obama or maybe Biden 10 years ago. He's just not there. He's not quick
He's not.
You
enough
don't
on
think he's
his feet.
charismatic?
Yeah,
Well,
he's not as charismatic, and he's not as quick.
yeah, he's folksy and charming, but Nick's exactly right. He's not quick like he used to be, and he's his strategy is to just not let the attention land on him. Like, all he's going to do is just be quiet and let Trump just continue to set himself on fire.
Mhm.
Like, every time anything happens where Biden has the ability to take the spotlight, he's like, you know what? I've had plenty of spotlight. I'm good. Here, have it back. And then Trump
Yeah.
sets himself on fire, gets gasoline, and dumps it on himself.
But think about this, Chuck.
And it's working. It's working. So
Think about this from a perspective of a Democrat or left-leaning person. Trump comes out, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. He's asked a very, clear question about handing over peaceful transition of power. And what does he say? Right?
That should be the easiest answer, or easiest question ever to answer.
And how
You
how
say, of
many
course, I
senators-
would abide by the results of the election, but he's not.
and
He's
how
not
many
doing
how many outraged Republican senators came out in the news the
that.
next day
Exactly.
and said
There
no,
were
he
there were a
shouldn't.
couple that took him to task, but not many at all.
But that's
So-
my point. So like, when they're crying about norms, that's like
Sure.
the worst, scariest shit you could say to some Democratic voters at this point, because
Sure.
they're already scared, right? And
Right.
he says stuff like that, and it's like, it's hard to take Republicans seriously. Although
this is
I
ex-
understand the argument.
And this is exactly my point about hardball, is that once you start opening up that line of attack, that means that hardball's on the table, and that's the game you're playing. And if you don't like hardball, then don't do stupid games like that enable the other side to have the rhetorical freedom to do that. So
Okay.
normally, like, again, like 2 years ago, to say nothing of 5, 10, 20 years ago, like, nobody would realistically talk about court packing. Like, just wouldn't be a thing. You're like, oh yeah, they do. FDR talked about that in the 30s. It's not.
It would seem too extreme.
But you also would never have had frickin', George W. Bush being like, I don't know about this whole peaceful transfer of power thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
I don't know. I don't think I'm going to do that. Like, no matter what you think about the old guys, like this wasn't even a thing. Like Reagan, Carter, like none of these guys. If you would ask them peaceful transfer of power, they'd be like, well, of course, we respect our values and our system.
Talking about more race changing, I think I've said this in another podcast. Remember the 2000 election where the difference was one electoral vote swung either way. And I remember not long after that, in one of the pre-Facebook books, we had message boards or whatever, political message boards, somebody suggested, if we could get just one elector to change their mind and we can give them all kinds of stuff. And he was shot down by fellow Democrats quickly. No, you don't mess with the Electoral College. You don't do that. That's underhanded.
You don't go against the
16 years
norm.
later, we had a very public campaign to get electors to change their votes. So in 16 years, something that was verboten was becoming promoted. That's not a lot of time.
That's what happens when you have a reality TV star as your president, because those norms are all pushed. And no matter how hard we've tried to hold on to those things and this constant shock face for the last 4 years, they've been pushed, they've been eroded. And it is sort of like this game of hardball with a lot of things right now. It's not just the courts.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things that he's just kind of eroded for us. Like the office of the presidency is a laughing fucking joke all around the world. And it hasn't been like this for us.
All it's cost us is our soul, no big deal.
I remembered what I was going to say, and it ties into this. So Schumer was talking about the threat of Barrett, not just for the ACA and all of the other jazz I said, but specifically for the fact that Trump is like, okay, so we have this election and it goes to the courts, and he's talking about it going all the way to the Supreme Courts. Now imagine if we have her in there along with all of the other conservative justices deciding on the outcome of elections. So the fear with having like conservative heavy judges for our nation is that we still get Trump in the end, because the Democrats are voting early. The Democrats are going to be doing mail-in ballots, and then you're going to have a whole shitload of Trumpers showing up on election day. So here we might feel like we have it in the bag, and then the next day it's going to be called for Trump, or it's not, because of all of those mail-in ballots and all of the early voting. And he's going to want to take things through the court system and say, no, there's got to be some fraud going on. So there's like this big game with having our justice system leaning conservative and protecting other conservatives in our government. And I think that is the biggest fear that we have. It's not this unbiased judicial system anymore. It's like there are activists out there protecting one another and this sort of dying party, and they're not going to release control of that. It's not going to be this peaceful transfer of power. It's going to be the court system protecting them so that they can stay in power. That's what I was trying to say about that.
Yeah, and you make a good point, because I think in some localities, the mail-in votes, be they absentee or early votes, in some precincts, in some states, they have to be hand counted. They're not going to be ready when we go to bed Tuesday night, November 3rd. They might not be ready when we have lunch the next day. And if this election is
Trump's going to throw a fit.
Close,
we all know he is.
Yeah,
he's going to throw a fit. If this
election is still undecided at that, they want to, and it's going to be hard when the Registrar of Pennsylvania finally reports early Thursday morning that Biden was really the winner here. What? And Nick is being attacked right now. We need to send a brigade up to Nick.
Yeah, and then you'll have media outlets on the left and the right calling the election for Biden or calling the election for Trump, and it's just going to be this all-out ridiculousness for about 3 to 5 days or however long the stupidity lasts.
It'll be longer than that, because then we'll get courts involved, and all of a sudden we will hear from Ohio about 10,000 ballots being discovered somewhere. We don't know from whom. Then Then we'll get a report from Florida that several hundred people were denied or had their ballots invalidated for this reason. All of these stories will start cropping up from sea to shining sea about election irregularities and whether or not they benefit or your party or the other party. We're just going to be
Trump's
hearing it,
banking
and
on
it's
that.
going to be coming up. And Trump will use that to try to delegitimize the entire process.
Yeah.
Look at all these reports. Even in Hawaii, they found this. In Florida, they found this. And it's really nothing more than happens on a large scale election from time to time. There's going to be mistakes. We are human. But Trump will try to use the totality of these findings to invalidate the election process.
Right. And
And
so
I just don't see a good outcome.
I realize that the federal level of Supreme Court justices aren't really going to be deciding the election. This is going to be our state judicials. Am I incorrect about that? I mean, it was the Florida Supreme Court that decided the Florida issue in
It's
2000.
more likely the states, yeah.
But
Yeah,
that was because the United States Supreme Court said Florida they could have ruled on it, right? It was in their jurisdiction, but
but Gore was
they
like,
let
oh,
Florida,
no
yeah.
thanks. Yeah, he didn't want to take.
Gotcha.
So I'm not sure actually how that goes. I just know that it goes to the state
Go
state
state first, yeah.
judiciaries first.
Yeah.
So
And
we're
that's
not
why
sure. how that's
as we
gonna
hear
work
these,
yet.
as we hear these reports from Ohio, Florida, Wisconsin, whatever, we're going to have several state lawsuits going on while everyone is in limbo. No one wants to call the race until the lawsuits are settled, and I don't think we are smart enough as a people or calm enough as a people to properly deal with that uncertainty.
I'm just going to opine that if Trump winds up winning the presidency based off of some kind of catastrophic, error or nonsense like that, he's going to wish he hadn't. He ain't going to have a good time. Like you're basically going to have half the Republican Party or some portion of them that's going to realize that that's put them in a very bad position. They may, like, what if they lose the Senate, but they manage to keep Trump in, for instance? Or what if, it's neck and neck 50-50 and, you only need like Mitt Romney to flip. You know what I mean? Like you could have all kinds of scenarios where not only that, but you'll have 2 years until the next election and the Democrats will be mobilized like you've never seen. Like it'll be unreal. Like just the wheels will fall off the place. And, Trump's just gonna be miserable. Like even if it's a win, it's gonna be the worst win ever. And he'll be basically a lame duck from the get-go. So
so hopefully we have
that,
the Senate and the House, even if that does happen, and then we just make his life extremely difficult.
Yeah, but I mean, you're basically be looking at the GOP, looking at what they have left, assuming that they make it, and be like, wow, like we just went from like unpopular to like radioactive. Like we've got now the 2022 elections to look forward to, and like now the whole country thinks that we stole this election. Like it's unreal how how unhappy everyone's going to be, and he's too stupid.
I like your optimism.
Well, that's not optimism. I'm saying it's just it's a reflection of how how you don't want to win in court with this sort of thing. Like what Gore did was actually in the benefit of the nation by not dragging it out and making it this kind of miserable thing that would have called into question Bush's legitimacy. You still had people who said that what was the old saying for there was some old rhymey thing for how he stole Florida, but basically Gore was like, I don't want the country to go through that. I'm just going to just call it here and we're good. But had he gone the other direction, I mean, he could have really sabotaged George Bush going in and really raised the stink and really made it bad. And America's never really gone through that because we've always had people, even back to Nixon, who had pretty good evidence that JFK had stuffed some ballots in Chicago and all that, and didn't really fight it. Just kind of like let it go the first time, and kind of came back to fight another day. Trump isn't that guy, but like there are people in the GOP who aren't stupid, and they don't want to go down that road and realize that, like, so what if you win at that point and everyone thinks you're a villain? Like, it's not the last election you're ever going to have. And, what do you do now once everyone thinks that you stole it and they hate you? So it's,
and under your scenario, we have divided government, and that's what I want. Mm-hmm. I want splits. I want I do not want one party to control all the arms. God knows I don't want that, but I just hope we have some functioning checks and balances come January 2021.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, you think that, you know, the lockdowns to make Trump look bad are bad now. Like if you have like half the states in the union that are like, you know, hardcore upset, and you know, a lot of the larger ones with a lot of the people, it's just bad. It's just it's a scenario we've never actually been in before, because we've had politicians that weren't that stupid, and they just, you know, they realize that, you know, it's a Pyrrhic victory. Like sometimes you win, but you wish you hadn't, and that's, you know, that's what Trump could be heading into if he tries to fight this too hard.
Sure, I understand that.
All right. So do you guys have any current events that you want to touch on? Anybody?
Regeneron.
Regeneron?
Regeneron.
Dun, dun, dun.
Trump's all better. Trump's all
So-
better now.
I have an extremely difficult time believing that he doesn't still have COVID-19.
So do
have
I.
Extremely difficult, this is me putting it nicely, time believing that he's not still contagious. I have an extremely difficult time believing anything him, his administration, his doctors, anybody at all that walks into the White House says about anything.
Oh, why is that?
And
So trustworthy.
and so now he's scheduled all of these rallies for next week or this week. Well, I guess.
Yeah, he had one yesterday or the day
Yesterday, yeah.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just so irresponsible and disgusting, and so it's my position.
I watched an interview that I think ABC News, NBC, can't remember which, with Eric Trump, and he called he said that his dad had taken the vaccine,
He definitely.
and yeah, had taken the vaccine, and the reporter was like, wait, did you say vaccine? And he's like, oh, well, I'm talking about, you know, the drugs they gave him while he was in the hospital. And he's like, oh, you mean the therapeutics? But like there was not even an acknowledgement of the huge mistake that he had just said,
Yeah.
that his dad took a vaccine as opposed to a therapeutic.
Eric
So-
Trump also said that his dad single-handedly saved Christianity
There you go.
Oh yes.
recently in that interview.
in that interview. Yeah. So
Oh.
look up
Oh,
Eric
I
Trump.
don't
dad.
remember that part.
Okay. Yeah. Saves Christianity. You can Google it. It's good stuff.
Did he give any particular reason for that statement, or did he
Biden
just-
hates God.
Okay.
So it's a thing. Oh, did you see the Lincoln Project ad, Nick, for Regeneron?
I didn't.
That I
Okay.
didn't get to see.
You guys should look up Lincoln Project Regeneron ad. It has Trump being like this, like 80s, like late night, like, you know, infomercial for Regeneron. And it does like Regeneron. I mean, it's actually pretty good. The Lincoln
I
Project
mean,
guys
if-
crack me up because it's, well,
Yeah, they have
you
the
know,
best.
They're,
They
well,
have the best.
yeah, because they're shameless Republicans that are now off the leash, and they're just going to continue
Yeah.
making attack ads just for the other side. But they're like, they're no longer even restrained by, you know, the old rules are just, I don't even know what the game plan is at this point, other than to ingratiate themselves with the Democratic leadership. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
some
love
of
the
them are
one with the cartoon one with the elephant who found herself in Trump's bed and got up and was completely ashamed and embarrassed that she had spent a night
oh
in bed
my,
with him. But it was not only the elephant in the room, but it was also representative of the party's animal. So yeah,
Right.
it was brilliant.
That's
You know,
wild.
you have that share screen.
So
You can always share it.
so Eric Trump also said in the same interview that that we've handled. Wait, he said rejecting a remote debate. Eric Trump said on This Week ABC that debating your opponent face to face is how we've handled presidential debates for the last 200 years.
Mm.
And the first presidential debate was in 1960, which, if you know how to do anything, if you know how to do math, was obviously not 200 years ago.
No.
And the
I think
third,
he meant the first televised debate.
televised, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're Lincoln Douglas debates, you know, a little bit
Yeah.
predate
that
that.
wasn't a presidential debate, right?
Lincoln Douglas was not, no.
No.
Oh, well, that's true. I guess you weren't really able to debate against the Confederacy at that point. It wasn't.
Right, but the first, yeah, right.
They won't
Davis was not unavailable for comment.
That's fabulous.
Anyway, he's an idiot. So anything else on the agenda for this week?
No.
No, just sit back and enjoy the madness.
How do you feel about the Steve Schmidt and all these anti-Trump, the Never Trump crew? Now that we're heading into potentially the end of Trump, like what do you foresee as their future, Nick?
So just to kind of touch on that, so who are some of the Never Trumpers? You have Steve Schmidt, you have
Rick Wilson.
I like Rick Wilson.
Yeah.
The thing is, and this kind of gets on me. I mean, I agree with them philosophically, but these guys have made an awful lot of money during the Bush years, promoting Bush policies and right policies, and now they're making a lot of money by making fun of Trump. I get the feeling some of them don't really have a center.
Even Conway, like George Conway's Republican. He tried to get a job with Trump.
Exactly. And it seems like, they're cashing in on an opportunity now, which is fine. I'll never begrudge somebody a chance to make money. But yeah, if you're asking me to think that this is truly what you think, no, you'll do this until the next money-making project comes along. So,
right.
And that's fine. I mean, you do that.
This is the problem I have with them, is that I think they're making a ton of money, right, off of the Lincoln Project. I find Steve Schmidt to be an awful person. He did get in a little tiff with my boy Jonah, so now I
saw that. Yeah,
like him even more.
And,
but here's the thing. Here's the thing. The difference between David French, Jonah Goldberg, Steve, whatever his name is, at the
Schmidt.
Dispatch, and Rick Wilson and Steve Schmidt and the other guy from Wisconsin, I forget his name. The guy who used to have the radio show. What's his name? Glasses. He was always on MSNBC. You know what I'm talking about?
Smerconish?
No, not him.
Mark Levin?
Jake Tapper?
No.
Glasses.
I'll figure it out after. Anyway, he was a radio talk show host, and he's like a Lincoln Project. He works at the Bulwark too. He's one of the editors there. I forget his name. He has glasses.
Oh, he works.
You'll know who he is. You see his name.
Where did he used to radio talk show?
Wisconsin. So I think the difference is that these guys kind of went over, did the Lincoln Project, and just kind of totally, Max Boot too, totally just rejected everything.
Oh, Charles Sykes.
Yeah, Charlie Sykes.
Yeah.
Charlie Sykes a little bit less. I kind of like him. I like Bill Kristol. But these other guys just sort of said, we have no conservative values. We're just Democrats now, or whatever. They rejected everything they believed in for all of these years.
Which is amazing. One of their theses is to vote Democrat to save the Republican Party. And okay.
Well,
Right.
one of the funny things about Steve Schmidt is that he's like a college football coach who never wins a game and then wants to be into the NFL. He's terrible. Like his track record is awful. I mean, he was behind McCain, his disastrous campaign and all that. He's just not good. Like the people he backs at any level tend not to win. And I'm like, how is this guy still here? Still grifting?
Because he took a firm anti-Trump stance.
Yeah.
He's very, out in the open about it on Twitter and MSNBC. He goes on these long rants where he's
failing his way up.
He found a revenue stream. I mean, as simple as that.
The difference between them and the Jonah Goldbergs of the world is Jonah Goldberg didn't abandon conservatism, but he wouldn't support Trump. And he ended up being alienated by his own party, but at the same time, he wouldn't side with Democrats. So he's stuck. That's why he created this podcast, The Remnant, and then eventually left National Review. Same thing with David French, and started the Dispatch. And so
Yep.
I just think that the distinction there, and the reason I like those guys so much, is because they weren't opportunistic in it. They kept the same values. They're the same exact people they were prior to Trump. And I just think there's something to be said about that. So when I listen to a Dispatch podcast versus something else, I just feel like the analysis, even versus the National Review, which is kind of Trumpian now, I just think it's a lot more objective, and that's why I like it, because I don't.
You know, the former president of the Screen Actors Guild once said, "I didn't leave my party left me."
Yeah,
Reagan.
that's right, and I think that's sort of
That man was Barack Obama. No, I'm kidding. You're right. It was Reagan. Yes.
No, you could actually say something like that on this podcast, and half the people who watch us would probably believe that.
So so where are they going to end up after? That's a good question.
Yeah, like what's
Where's
the play?
Bulwark, right? The Bulwark, that entire outlet is based on anti-Trump people.
Yeah, they won't have anybody to hate anymore.
Yeah, like what do you do at that point? Like you're gonna hope that Ted Cruz takes you back? Like
Yeah.
I think people like Bill Kristol will try to create some grassroots Republican organization that's very anti-Trumpian in almost every way. And I think Steve Schmidt will hopefully go back to the bridge that he lives under. You know, I don't know. Rick Wilson doesn't bother me as much, but I don't necessarily think there's a place for them in an anti-Trump or
Well, they've demonstrated that their talents are for sale. Wherever there's a revenue stream, that's what they will support. And you know, if you can't find one, they'll make one. Again, I don't trust people like that, but I'm not going to begrudge their ability to make money off of that either.
So we probably don't have time to get into this, but maybe food for thought for next time is, because this kind of leads into the logical conclusion of that is, you know, whither go the grand old party after Trump?
Yeah.
Like what's going to happen? Because right now they're like all in for Trump, 100%. Like, you know, nothing there, you know, he's the alpha and the omega, that nothing exists outside of Trump.
I think I think it really depends on how badly the Republicans get beaten in this election. Like
and how badly Trump takes it. If his name come January 2021 is absolute mud to even Republicans and to Democrats, it'll be easier for Republicans to sever that tie. If not, there's a lot of emotional connections to Trump from a lot of mainstream GOPers, and they're going to have a hard time cutting the umbilical cord there, because I mean, you know, a lot of people already view Trump as in a very negative way. If he shows his ass on the way out and no one wants to be associated with him anymore, the healing will be better. If he does not, and there's still a whole bunch of Trump feelings in the GOP, they're going to have a hell of a time bringing things back together within a decade, I believe.
I think it's going to be tough, but I think that if there is like a tsunami and they lose the Senate and they lose the presidency, that you're going to see, I think you're already seeing some senators come out against him in these very subtle ways. You notice that with the COVID stuff, they're taking a little bit more seriously. McConnell came out and said that, made like this very sort of indirect jab at the White House for being irresponsible with COVID. What's her name from Iowa said something. Ted Cruz was on one of the Sunday shows today, and he basically said that the election looks like it's going to be a bloodbath. You know, with the Democrats.
You should listen to his podcast. Ted Cruz's podcasts are very interesting.
Honestly, Ted Cruz he runs a pretty good podcast. Like I don't love the guy, but he actually is pretty good at it.
He has really good people on to interview, I have to say.
Probably he's a smart guy, right?
Yeah.
Certainly.
Do you think that we would be in this situation had Ted Cruz won?
No.
I don't think so either.
And I remember having the debate with people, who would I rather have win, Ted Cruz or Donald Trump? And there were lots of people out there who were like deathly afraid of Cruz because he was so religious and all of this other stuff. And I'm like, there's no contest, because Ted Cruz, you know, he's a constitutionalist guy, right? Although you wouldn't know it these days, but that was his whole spiel.
Yeah.
So if you just one last quick question. So Biden makes it 2 years. As we all know, he's going to retire in 2022 and hand it over to Kamala Harris so she can run in 2024, because he'll be like 89 at that point. Like it just, you know, I don't even, yeah.
102.
Yeah, literally, like he'll be too old for, you know, Marine One to even like lift his wheelchair and like fly in places.
Man.
So all I'm saying is that Donald Trump will still be a spry 78 years old at that point. Does he run for re-election for round 2? Like, does he jump in the
No.
primary and be like, I'm back, baby, I'm back, and tries to get a rematch against Harris in 2024?
He is-
No, but Eric Trump will try.
Or,
And
or
he
Tru-
will fail
Donald
because
Jr.?
he's not going to be, yeah. But then
No.
Ivanka Trump's going to try, and they're going to embrace her like you've never seen before, because she's going to be way more cool and have a
No.
lot more quote unquote class than
telling
her
you,
dad did.
the Ivanka Trump ticket would not go far, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
It'll be Donald. It'll be Donald
It's
Jr.
also
Yeah.
Positive.
Not Junior if it's anybody, but if you go to like the Breitbart chat room things that they have on some of those articles, they hate Ivanka Trump. They think she's a Democrat. They really despise her, and there's a lot of reason for that. A lot of her positions are pretty left wing, from what I understand. Same thing with Jared Kushner.
They're
Which
socially
is
left. I mean,
actually
they're.
why I feel like they would embrace her over Eric.
Oh, I mean, I think that the Bonginos and the Tim Pools and all that would lose their mind with her. Like they tolerate her now because they're kind of the boss likes her.
Have you
So
ever
it's
seen
like the
her in
boss's
an
kid.
interview?
Yeah.
She's like a little princess.
Yeah. No, she's not. Yeah. She's great on paper, like the concept, but then you listen to her talk, you're like, oh, not there. Now, Donald Trump Jr., that guy imagines himself, he's got like the mirror with like the presidential seal that he goes and stands in front of and imagines himself president kind of a thing. He's that guy. And Eric Trump is like he's lucky to tie his shoes in the morning. Like that guy's a complete
Yeah.
dimwit. Like seriously, like he
Yeah,
You
he
know.
doesn't strike me as.
But I
as-
think
he
I
was lucky
think
to be born where he
Trump's
was.
base would vote for him. I do.
Eric,
I think
yeah,
there'd
but
be a lot of them that would.
I used to think the SNL skit that they do of him, where they make him just look like the stupid one, was
Yeah.
exaggerated. But honestly,
Yeah.
he's pretty dumb.
He's really dumb. Yeah, Don Jr. is actually, honestly, any of them that could pull it off would be him. I mean, he's weirdly charismatic. He's funny. He's got the same sense of humor his dad does. And he's, he understands how the game's played a little bit better. Like if you follow him on Twitter, he's actually pretty good at it. So I don't know.
I agree. I think if anybody could do it, it'd probably be him. But
Or Barron. Barron's approval is sky high.
all right. You can't even go.
Is that
32.
2050 or I don't know how old he is.
2052.
We're not touching Barron on this podcast. He's a nice kid.
2044.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
All right. So that's it. I guess we can close it out for this week. Thank you guys for coming. Unless anybody has anything to say.
I'm good.
I just want to say that I don't think Trump's base is going anywhere, regardless of how this election pans out for Trump or not, and the GOP decides to start jumping ship in droves. I don't think Trump's base is going anywhere. I think these people are insane. But I'm going to try something, and everyone's going to hate me for it. And I'm really going to try to start
I think
handing out some olive branches.
I think a lot of Trump's appeal comes from an entertainment position.
Yeah.
I'm not like, it's not like his base are a bunch of intellectuals, and I don't mean to say that disparagingly, but I just feel like once he goes away, the GOP loses those people kind of, because I don't think they're as interested anymore. Because I think Trump.
Oh, like they won't show up to vote anymore? That'd be cool.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. It's really tough to tell.
Yeah.
I'll be looking forward to it in about 3 months to see like how that all breaks. Because at some point the finger pointing, the recriminations are just going to get it's going to get really, really bad.